So a little description about our wisdom talks. So the wisdom talks are also very potent, and we've integrated a lot of information into them that we feel is very relevant to our yoga practice and to just living every day, just to help expand our understanding and our consciousness around all these amazing teachings. So I felt it was very important. We both felt it was very important to include mantra in the wisdom talks. We are doing the kirtan bhajan singing concerts, and that's a different section. But in the wisdom talk, for every deity, we are opening up with Gayatri Mantra for every deity. So the Gayatri Mantras are very important. Gayatri Mantra is actually a meter. It's a special rhythm, and it's 24 syllables. And it was originally crystallized in the Rig Veda, a very ancient Sanskrit text. And they were written in a way that is very alchemical, rhythmic, and the physiological effects of chanting the Gayatri Mantra are very powerful on many levels in our physical body and all of our bodies, actually. So we made sure to include the Gayatri Mantras for every deity that we're sharing about. So the Gayatri Mantra we do, and then I'm also sharing japa. So we pick one of the more popular mantras, the basic mantra, basically the Bij mantra for the deity, and we'll be doing a round of japa and the repetition, and we'll be doing that together. So that's another powerful practice, just invoking the energy of the deity. And we're also going to be sharing the Bija mantras. So Bija basically means the seed mantra for the deities, and this is also a very important aspect of learning about the energy of the deity. So for instance, the seed syllable for Saraswati is Aim, A-I-M, Aim. And the Bija syllable for Lakshmi is Shri, Shrim, Shri. So these are very potent sound currents that encapsulate, that embody the energy of these deities, these incredible manifestations of consciousness. So we'll be learning that. And then I will also be sharing puja. Puja, this particular puja, I've learned at the Sattva Yoga Academy, and so it's in that tradition. And really we're actually only doing for the goddesses, but we're honoring all the deities on our altar because that's just the way we've learned that. And it's very special. Puja really also helps integrate the elements into our practice. We offer the water, the incense, the fire, the food, the flowers, and we just have that whole integrated offering of our awareness of the elements and bringing that into our practice. So it just amplifies it that much more, clarifies it, and empowers our offering.
Yeah, puja is the Sanskrit word for ceremony or a ritual to connect in a devotional way to the deities. So we're elevating the state of mind and emotion towards a place of reverence. And this is a really, really important practice because then it transforms the experience to a kind of a mundane, kind of a separateness to a heart opening and a merging and a connection to the deity. And then the more we do that, the more the magic starts to unfold. And in that magical unfolding, then it starts to come to life. And if not, it's hard to bring it to life. It's always kind of separate from you. So you have to have this tangible experience of it to make it magical and visceral for your experience, for your mental, egoic, and soulful experience. So you're like, wow, okay, I can embrace this at a whole nother level. So yeah, the pujas and the mantras are very important for that. But then we also want to talk about and explain more about a whole variety of things. So we're going to cover a little bit of the historical context of the deities. We're also going to cover some more of the iconography, because each one, as you can see, particularly in the statues, which are called murtis, they have specific symbolism, right? They're either holding mudras, they're holding weapons, they're holding lotus flowers, they're holding instruments. So everything has symbolism, and we'll just go ahead and we'll talk about some of that symbolism throughout the course of what it means. Why do they have that specific symbolism? How does that relate to us? How does that relate to our day-to-day lives? Why is this important? And all of that, you'll find that it starts weaving together into the human experience and understanding the human experience more and more, from a mundane level to a cosmic and celestial level, and how it's all interwoven. So that's the really beautiful teachings. We'll also go into visualizations and go into, I'd like to close it with some visualizations of the deities, because in those visualizations you start having a much more personal experience. All of a sudden it starts coming alive for you, and the experience, all of a sudden you are in the experience. You are experiencing the deity. You are maybe even embodying the deity. And then it takes on a whole nother life, whole nother experience of tangible, practical, and cosmic and imaginative experience. So you need all these elements to really start bringing all of this into life, bring it into your personal culture. And as you do so, then it anchors into you. It anchors into your experience. So then it's you. It's not that it's something separate. It's not a storyline. It's not some kind of mythology that's outside of you. Mm-hmm. It's not just this little stories. It's the ongoing living tradition. And this is an important understanding, that Sanatanam Dharma, which is this ongoing living tradition, that is the Vedas, that is the yoga tradition, that has been around for over 5,000 years. We're talking about a tradition that's just been going on for so long. And that's like at a minimum 5,000 years. So we're talking about a very ancient tradition. And with that, I want to give you a little more context of this tradition. So we're talking about, first and foremost, it's a little tricky to distinguish between what is called yoga and Vedas. So Vedas are the living wisdom teachings that have been passed down, and in certain cases were written down. In particular, there's 4 main Vedas, starting at least at a minimum of 5,000 years ago. Okay? From those Vedas unfold also other spiritual teachings and commentaries that are called the Upanishads, and then even later on the Puranas. Now, the Puranas are perhaps the most important to focus on, because the Puranas are more focused on the deities. And they give stories and mythology and creation, sustaining, and destruction stories that each deity is part of. And so those are really, really important, in particular for this journey where we're talking and sharing so much about the deities. 2 other very important stories that we share a bit about is the most famous stories of India, basically, is the Ramayana, which is the story of Ram and Sita and Hanuman, which is said to be over 7,000 years ago, and it took place 7,000 years ago. And the Mahabharata, which is the story of Krishna and Arjuna and the many characters there, which also includes the Bhagavad-Gita. And that is said to be over 5,000 years ago. And in particular, the Bhagavad-Gita that comes out of the Mahabharata. Mahabharata means the great epic, the story of Bharat. Bharat is the name of India back in those ancient times. And Maha means the great India, the great story of India. Again, it wasn't called India then, it was called Bharat. And the Bhagavad-Gita, the song Gita is sung, Bhagavad is the celestial or the divine or godly song. So that it's called this divine song. It's the great song of the celestial. And this is the most famous of texts that's come out of India and of this region we call India now. And out of this Vedic and yogic culture. And this most famous text comes out of the Mahabharata. So this is a really important understanding because this is the story of when Krishna is teaching Arjuna about what? Yoga. And this is anchoring this concept of like, what is yoga? And in this context, of course, yoga is this union, this unity of consciousness between the individualized expression of consciousness as we are learning and awakening into the merging, the unity of oneness, of consciousness itself, the all-pervasive consciousness. So you see, in this way, yoga and Vedas and yoga and the stories are interwoven. So it's kind of like, it's very hard to separate or distinguish between what is yoga and what is the Vedas, because they kind of just are intertwined and interwoven. And yoga, on the one hand, is a philosophical system. In India, there's 6 different main philosophical systems, and yoga is one of them. And Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is part of the yogic philosophical system. But there are many other philosophical systems as well. But it also relates, of course, to what we mostly know in the West, which is like the asanas, the postures, and the breath work. Okay? That is typically still considered under the yoga umbrella, but actually starts moving into something more considered like tantra. And of course, some of you have heard of tantra in a kind of skewed Western style understanding of tantra and relating to sexuality. But the reality is that tantra is this massive body of teachings, of lifestyle, of culture, of ultimately experiential practices to commune with the divine. It is the practice of realizing the divine within and without, and that there is no difference of that divine. There is no separation, that we are experiencing this oneness, a weaving of the internal and the external, a weaving of the unmanifested and the manifested, a weaving of masculine and feminine, a weaving of sun and moon, all these concepts of these, the yin and the yang, all that is tantra. So what we know in the West has serious influences by tantric teachings. And a lot of tantra has emphasis on devotion to Shiva and Kali and Durga, and all the goddesses. In particular, a lot of it's focused on goddess worship. So again, if you've had more influence on a lot of this goddess worship, you may have actually had a lot more influence from Tantra than you have had from a traditional Hindu type influence. And I'm just going to touch really briefly on this concept of Hindu as well, because Hindu and Hinduism is a relatively new term, and that term was formulated by the British when they went to India, and they were trying to understand what was going on in India in regards to spirituality, because they wanted to be able to put it into like some kind of context, and they had no idea, or very little, so they gave it a big umbrella term called Hinduism, meaning from the Hindu valley, the Indus Valley. So they called them Hindus. But they really had no idea what was going on. And what really is taking place more so in India in the modern era is a devotion to particular deities. So what you have ends up having is a breakup of people who are a little more on the worship of Vishnu or the incarnations of Vishnu, such as Rama and Krishna.
Buddha.
And Buddha, maybe in this case, although the Buddhists don't consider themselves Vaishnavas. You also have Shaivites who worship Shiva. You have Shaktas who worship Shakti, and that can be in the form of Kali, of Durga, of Lakshmi, of Saraswati, any of the goddesses. Yeah, typically that's more of a standalone goddesses. Sometimes it's woven with their masculine counterparts, but not always. And typically in a Shakta type tradition, they're worshiping just the divine feminine. And then there's many, many other, varieties to that. I don't want to get too deep into this, but it's important to understand that concept so that when you hear someone say, well, is this Hinduism? Know that Hinduism is a very ignorant understanding that was placed on Indians by British and Europeans and ultimately Westerners that had no idea what was taking place here, or very little understanding of what was taking place in India in the devotional practices. And so the clarity is more in the understanding of, from the Vedic tradition, from the yogic tradition, from the tantric tradition, from this understanding of these epics, the stories, what is called the Itihasa, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are conveying these historical and cosmic understandings, not only historically of what was taking place in India, but a relay of what's happening with consciousness, what's happening with human consciousness. And it doesn't matter whether it's 7,000 years ago, whether it's 10,000 years ago, whether it's now, or whether it's 10,000 years in the future. The rishis, or the seers, who wrote these things down, who shared it, who passed it down, lineage after lineage after lineage, student to guru to student to guru to student, for thousands of years. What they were sharing with you and with us now is a living tradition that's always relevant. No matter the time frame, it's always relevant. So Vedas and this understanding of yoga is always relevant, no matter the time frame. And this is why it's important to understand the difference. And when they say, what are you? Are you a Hindu? No. I practice Sanatam Dharma, the eternal teachings. The eternal teachings. And that correlates and is in congruency with yoga and yoga practices, Tantra and Tantric practices, and Vedas and the Vedic wisdom. Okay? That's a lot. It's a lot to receive if you haven't received it before, but it's important for you to understand some of the context, because we're about to dive into this and we'll be speaking to some of these things. And there's one more thing. Oh yes, I'm going to speak about Dharma, because Sanatam Dharma. So what's Dharma? We're going to be speaking to Dharma quite a bit, and it's important to understand Dharma and karma. So from the yogic perspective, a very simple understanding, but very deep, because we can talk about this for hours and hours and lifetimes and lifetimes. Dharma has 3 components. The first component is how you relate to yourself, your soul, and your own evolutionary process. So we're not talking about regression, we're talking about progression, we're talking about evolution, we're talking about becoming a better human being, your own personal culture of that. The second component is how you are ultimately relating to the environment. You're relating to your natural world. Why is this so important? Because it's hard to survive in a human experience if you're not relating properly with your natural environment. And we've seen this historically time and time again. There's a certain threshold that you can live in a certain area, but if you are not finding ways in which you are in balance with the natural environment, civilizations collapse. People die. Okay? Big transformations happen. Deserts are created. Big grasslands are created instead of forests because of the way that we're managing land. So that's the second component. The third component is how we relate to others, how we relate to our families, how do we relate to our, intimate relationships, our friends, our community, our societies. So all of that is related and encompassed in Dharma. And Dharma ultimately then, again, is part of how you are evolving, how you are uplifting consciousness. Because Dharma is about upliftment, it's about thriving, it's about awakening. All that is encapsulated in Dharma. Karma is the kind of the flip side, not so much actually the flip side, because karma is typically more understood as this ever-repeating known or the cause and effect, okay? And this cause and effect is important to understand because it's not just in this lifetime. There's various forms of karma, and typically there's talked about also that there's past life karmas, and those are called samskaras. And that's what you're carrying from your past life. And some things are, great. It's great that you could carry certain memories and understandings into this life because you're building upon those. So like Lakshmi and I, for example, maybe we had a lot of past lives playing music or doing yoga practices. And so then here we are learning and practicing and cultivating this life, and it was much easier for us this life than maybe in another lifetime. So that's just one example. But the karma of also your past experiences where perhaps there was a lot of unconsciousness that was hurtful or that needed to be rectified ultimately will come also into this life and perhaps be worked on in this lifetime. And in that, you are experiencing different things that come up in your life. Well, why is this happening for me right now? Why do I have to learn these lessons? Why am I needing to grow in this way? In the yogic understanding, it's because you had these karmas from past lives and that you're working on. Some of it you may even had from this life. So some things that you learn and maybe have done, and then boom, there's action, and then there's a reaction. These can be both more good karma or a little bit more on the, I don't really want to call it bad and good karma, because even that is in the domain of mind. But ultimately, there's just karma. There's karma, and there's action and reaction. And certain things we would, at a mental level, consider good or bad, but ultimately it's just karma. It's just growth. And some of this karma keeps us just cyclical, because it's what is considered the ever-repeating known. And most of us work in a structured context where we just want to know, life we want to know. We don't want very many variables. This is where the fear of nature comes in, because nature is always constantly changing. And we are always having to work with this constant change, which is just either can be wonderful or so annoying, right? Or terrifying. Whether if a hurricane comes or a tornado or an earthquake, big natural disasters, terrifying. On beautiful sunny days, wonderful. But we don't ever know. We're constantly trying to predict it. But karma and from the human psyche and the egoic structure, we're always trying to control and make things the same. We want to create culture. We want to do the same things. We want to cook the same way. We want to dress the same way. We want life to be as similar as possible so that we don't have to step out of the boundaries of the known and into the unknown. And so this is typically karma. Karma is the cyclical knowing and repeating memory of patterns. Okay? So Dharma, karma, both very important understandings, because when we're talking about the deities and we're talking about the teachings of the deities, really we're moving from karma to Dharma. All the deities are sharing with us those same teachings, karma to Dharma. All right. Whew, that was a lot. So again, just another quick little brief understanding. These are the actual statues are called murtis, but the deities are ishtas. the Ishtas. And typically there's one or several Ishta that a person has an inclination towards. Like you may just like Ganesha, or you just might like Lakshmi or Saraswati, or gosh, I don't know who this crazy guy with the dreadlocks is, but I like him. Oh, Shiva. Oh, nice. I like Shiva a lot. So we initially may have an inclination towards that, and it may turn out to be like a very strong inclination, and that's what they call the Ishta Devata, is your primary god that you want to connect with, your deity that you connect with. But what we have found over time is that as you grow and mature and evolve, that each one is very symbolic of the hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell would share with us, that the evolution and the maturing of the human soul, the experiences that we're having throughout our life, all of a sudden each deity holds meaning. Woo, Ganesh!
Especially Ganesh.
He's just falling back at this talk, this sharing. So each deity just has its own context and wisdom teachings for us to learn about as we go through life. And you'll learn about each one through this course, and then you'll get to be like, oh, wow, okay, I can relate to that deity in this way, and I'm relating to my life in this way, and all of a sudden what seems mundane to you in this day-to-day existence, all of a sudden may be elevated into a celestial understanding, a cosmic understanding, that there's a greater purpose, greater teachings that are there for us to embrace and embody. And so this is the great teachings of the Ishtas, the Devas, the gods, for us to embrace. And I'll close with that the connection with deities and these practices is a science. It's not a belief. And this is a really important concept to know, because we're not just talking about believing in gods. We're talking about the embodied practices and understanding of how to fully bring the deities to life in your consciousness. It's not a belief, it's your truth. It's not my belief, it's my truth. This is existence, this is consciousness, and consciousness has unfolded in this way. And it's been unfolding this way for thousands of years. This is not just something that's new. What we're sharing with you has been an evolution of thousands of years of understanding the science of devotion, the science of the deities.